All right, welcome back to the Exo18 Leadership Podcast. This is Kelly Sherpy. I'm here in the studio with our two co-founders, Ed and Christy Ivy.
Thank you, Kelly. It's great to be here.
Hey, it's great being here.
Awesome. I'm super excited about our podcast today. We've got a very special guest with us today, Dr. Michael Spivey, all the way from the great state of Florida.
Come on now.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being here. Now, Ed, I know that y'all are close, so
Yes.
I'm actually gonna pass the baton over to you and let you introduce your good buddy,
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Michael.
I really feel honored that we have Dr. Mike with us during this time. Mike and I have been best friends for 27 years. 27 years ago, we were both young youth pastors and new in Miami. We were youth pastoring in Miami together. And I called him up on the phone one day and just said, hey, heard you just got to town. I'm kind of new here. And, you want to go grab lunch. And so we started going to lunch every Wednesday. And, we went to the steak place where you threw the peanuts on the floor. We were actually trying to remember what the name of it was. We couldn't remember the name, but it wasn't Texas Roadhouse, but it was something similar.
Yes.
But it kind of started a journey for us. And over the last 27 years, we've been best friends. And when I say best friends, I don't mean like we talk every now and then. I mean, we talk once or twice a day. At least, and as Mike has said,
with gusts up to 5 times a
with
day.
gusts up to 5 times a day. Yeah,
I love
and
that.
and Mike has been there for me in some of my darkest times, and TD Jakes, Mike, you shared it with me a while back, but TD Jakes said one time, he said, you have 3 different types of people in your life. You have constituents, and then you have comrades, and you have confidants. And he said, there are always constituents that are around us as leaders. And then you have some people that will walk with you that you're friends with, but you're blessed if you have those 1 or 2 people in your life that are true confidants that really know everything about you. And for me, that's been Mike for 27 years. So I feel blessed that he's part of our Exo18 Leadership Podcast. And I know later on we're going to share a little bit about even some of the initiatives that he has. But Mike, why don't you take a second and just kind of greet us? We'd love to hear a little bit about you.
Yeah, well, it's my great joy to be here. Ed and Christy have been really an integral part of our lives for forever. And I can't imagine not having had our relationship for the duration of ministry. I don't think I could have made it through ministry. We've walked through some really hard things on both sides of the table, And so, the last 3 years or so, I've been in a doctoral program and of leadership and spiritual formation. And the formational component of the program really has sort of reshaped my heart and my life and the way that I want to do life from this point forward for the rest of my life. It's put some tools in my hand that hopefully I'll be able to pass on to some other people. And really it's my heart to come alongside men and women who are in ministry, who may be struggling, who may be in some fatigue or burnout, and to help them make it for the long haul. And so, I'm passionate about this subject, and I hope today will be beneficial.
Yeah, Mike, talk just for a couple of moments. Talk about kind of what brought that on? What was kind of the thing that you said, man, this happened, or I felt this, or was involved in the situation with the pastor that brought on kind of that passion in this area.
It's funny. I really went into this program thinking I want to be able to help other people, but throughout the course of it, really what I discovered is that I needed healing in my own life, and so as I studied and researched, it was a healing journey for me that I know that a lot of people, we all walk similar paths, and it doesn't matter if you're charismatic or Baptist or Methodist. The ministry journey it's a tough journey, and pulls a lot out of you. And if you're not really intentional and really specific about the patterns you put in your life and the practices that you initiate, you don't end up we all know people who are bitter and angry and frustrated, and they've been doing ministry for 20, 30, 40 years, or did until they completely burned out. And so, yeah, this was as much a self-discovery of how are you going to make it, as it was helping other people. So the process of the journey has been fantastic for me.
Yeah, I want us to talk a little bit about burnout.
Yeah.
And burnout's one of we've heard about it for years, and I used to be of that mindset a little bit where I was like, how do you burn out? I mean, if you've got passion, and we mutually know of some people that would probably say, you can't burn out,
Sure.
if spiritually you're in the right place, that, that would never happen or anything.
Yeah.
But I know you did a lot of research around some of that. Let's just talk about that a little bit. So some of what you discovered, and maybe defining the problem a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's a trendy topic right now. Self-care and all that kind of stuff, which it's really good. It needs to be talked about. There's a Welsh preacher named Christmas Evans who used to tell this story. He said he met a guy who told him, well, I would rather wear out than rust out for the Lord. Right. I mean, I'll rest when I die. That kind of thing.
Right.
And he said the bravado of all that, it sounds really good, but I've seen the bodies along the wayside. And I've seen what the could have beens and should have beens that just destroyed themselves. And he said, surely there has to be another way to do this,
Yeah.
So I was just scrolling through Twitter a couple days ago, and the last 3 tweets that Carrie Newhoff had say this: the overall well-being of pastors has hit an all-time low. A drop in the level of pastoral health during this significant past 7 years isn't just unprecedented. It signals a crisis that the church has to address. And the data shows that most pastors don't appear to have even the beginning of a plan to get healthy or truly restore themselves in their time off.
Wow.
Man.
And so, the research says that pastors aren't doing well, that the events, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, have been devastating, that most pastors are trying to get back to a certain level of people or income, and that maybe isn't even the most healthy thing to be trying to do, to get back. Maybe there's something new out there that we ought to be looking at, And so there's frustration, the financial stuff, racial tensions, the last political cycle, and the one that'll start up here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Where some people just won't allow you to. I'm sure you guys remember a day when it was kind of, you didn't talk about politics. Yeah. Like it was none of your business who I voted for.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But church folks aren't that way anymore. Churches aren't. Everything is so divisive, and so I mean, it's a tough day to be a pastor.
What are some of the symptoms? I mean, when we talk about burnout, talk about the symptoms. What does that look like? Because I'm sure guys are listening, and maybe they're in that mentality of, no, I'll never experience burnout. And they could be experiencing burnout right now.
Yeah.
But what are those symptoms?
Burnout's kind of like dehydration. Like by the time you got it going on, it's been going on for a while. And so, excuse me, some of the obvious things that pop out are starting to do only the minimum. Like you're just doing what you have to do to get by for the day. Your spiritual health starts to struggle. The scriptures don't hold a place for you much anymore. Prayer becomes dry. You stop growing. Pastors who used to be really excited about personal growth and church growth and discipling people, all of a sudden that stuff starts to take a back seat. Enthusiasm for ministry, passion for what used to, things that used to bring you great passion, you don't do that anymore. Creativity starts to to wane. You start to get resentful towards other people who are doing it better than you.
Not realizing they may be in the same spot.
Exactly. And I know not everybody is naturally effervescent, you know. There are some people who they're little old people when they're 7 years old. You know, they're old, little,
right.
crotchety
Little
old.
old souls.
So I get that. And sometimes it's a mood that just passes. But, you know, we can't be excited for other people when they succeed because, you know, it just darkens our heart. Physical health even starts to take a toll. You don't feel like doing things, so you don't exercise and you don't eat right and you don't do the things that you ought to do. A big one is you start to isolate. We talked about that.
And I feel like that's a huge one.
Yeah,
You know,
it is massive.
And, you know, in my own journey, Mike, you're very familiar with my journey. And I would say isolation was probably one of my biggest symptoms, just withdrawing from everything.
Yeah.
And everybody. Only doing, when you said that about doing the minimum, you know, only doing the stuff that would help get me by and trying to do it as gregarious as possible so that nobody knew really what was happening internally, you know. And so you get out there and that little bit of, we used to joke around that, you know, I was always running on empty. And it was like I would get up in the morning and put just enough gas in to get me through a couple of hours. It was like having a car that you had to drive for a while, but I only got $5 to put in this thing, you know. And but Mike, how is isolation affecting pastors today? Because it seems like because of kind of the current crisis or the crisis that we've experienced in the last number of years, and then just, you know, the overall cultural landscape, it seems like there's a greater isolation that's taking place where guys are just kind of imploding or kind of becoming more inclusive. Are you seeing some of that?
Yeah, I would think that's a huge part of it. I think social media has a ton to do with it because we see so-and-so's ministry is flourishing and hundreds of people are getting born again. And here I am struggling to you know, hold it all together over here. So it just crushes you down a little more. And the isolation component, that's kind of moving towards the end stage of real deal burnout. By the time you get to isolation, you're not in a good place. But studies will show over and over again that it's what men and women do. We pull back into ourselves. We separate from others, and there's usually lots of signs before that. So if you're there, it's time for some help.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of those things too.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that I'll mention is where there used to be joy, there's a lot of joyless days. You know, where you might have moments where you laugh, but that deep sense of abiding joy that Jesus gives isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
You know? And so, I mean, there's just a few things that you might recognize.
And you may not even know that you've lost it.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it's not until you start getting it back that you realize that, oh, wait, no, I didn't have this for a long time.
or if you ask your wife to be honest with you.
No, we won't. You know, I recently heard a pastor, a well-known, nationally known pastor, that if I, you know, said the name, most people would be like, oh, yeah. But it was really interesting listening to them because they were talking about being on social media themselves and looking at others. And getting depressed, and said and they said I had to get off social media. I mean, they have tens of thousands of followers,
right?
You know, and they said I had to get off because I was finding myself getting depressed and getting in this place of almost envy because of, you know, just looking at other, you know, which is just crazy. You don't think, you know, you think it's kind of in your world, but really, Mike, I mean, the issues affecting whether it's small, medium, or large church, would you say that some of the issues are the same?
They're the same.
It's the same thing.
100% the same. we're going to talk about in some future podcasts about scalability and those kinds of things. But it all relates.
Right.
Like small church, big church, it doesn't matter. You have the same issues. They just are smaller or bigger. You know?
Yeah.
Right.
And I would even say, too, that it's not just impacting lead pastors, but as Kelly and I both have served in roles as on executive teams, I believe it's trickling down, and it's affecting all pastors in ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And it really wasn't until I was in this doctoral program that I really stopped to realize, besides my wife, there were really only two other people that I ever really had deep conversations with. It was you and another pastor friend that we know. And I thought, this cannot be good. Some other men came into my life through this program. It's been so life-giving. It's been to get different perspectives and to have different people sowing into your life has been so good. So I feel like in some ways I've broken loose that isolation.
Let me ask you, our podcast is probably a lot of pastors that are listening to it that have boards or some type of a leadership structure and oversight. And how does a guy that is feeling burnout, that are at least feeling some of those initial symptoms or maybe full-blown in there, how does he approach that group of people to be able to say, I'm struggling here and I need help? How does he do that?
Yeah. When you're working with a church board or denominational leadership, if you have a struggle, like the last place you want to go to is people who are your overseers.
Yeah.
Like you don't know how they're going to respond if a pastor has a porn problem or he has some kind of other kind of issue. Where are you going to go? Or if you're just in that place of, man, I'm just really struggling right now. I think sometimes it's good to get out from that insulated space into maybe a relationship or a relationship with a group of people that you can really be open and honest with, where there's you don't have to fear repercussion or judgment. That's one of the things that I kind of developed through the process of my program is a cohort that deals with that. But
tell us about that. Tell us about the cohort.
Yeah, so I do a deal called the Thriving Pastors Cohort. It's an in-person 9-month, once a month gathering of people who, some men, some women, mostly lead pastors, but not necessarily, where we discuss things that we all have issues and struggles with, things like exhaustion and distraction and failures and disappointments. And it's a safe place for them to share. It's a covenantal space where we just agree that, hey, what is said here stays here. And we talk through those, and we at the end, we'll go through a spiritual exercise that'll help them. If you're struggling with exhaustion, right, you have to carve out some time to rest. And so maybe you talk about Sabbath keeping for a little while. But it's just a way for people to process out loud in order to get better. The boardroom's probably not the place for that. I have tremendous respect. We've worked with boards, all of us, for years. But too many people have been burned by sharing something they thought was personal with somebody, and then it comes back as ammunition against you. I would just recommend getting outside, maybe even of your denominational structure, to be able to be open and honest with people.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. I was just looking at some of these stats, and one of these stats kind of just hit me. 80% believe that ministry has adversely affected their families, talking about ministry leaders and pastors.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? And Kelly, even for you, because you were involved as an executive pastor and leader of Freedom Ministry and helped develop some of that. And I'm sure you saw and experienced some of that. So maybe even speak into that a little as well.
Yeah. I think we don't talk enough about the demands that are placed on pastors and ministry leaders and just leaders in general when it comes to emotional demands, spiritual demands, and then just pace, right? And I think one of the hardest things for me as a being in ministry and then also having a family was finding a rhythm that worked for my family, and a rhythm that included rest. And so when you try to incorporate like a church calendar and all the demands that are placed on you there, and then, the family demands, and trying to, figure that out. And then I think one of the biggest things that I've learned in just in my growth in leadership is learning how to manage my energy, more so than managing my time, but learning how to manage my energy. Because I think that's kind of where like the secret sauce, like the essence of who you are comes out in is in the kind of energy that you're able to bring. And I know that when I'm flat, it's usually because I am running on fumes and I don't have a good rhythm that doesn't include rest. It doesn't include the things that make me me, and I know for me, one of the biggest things, is time with my family. And then just even being a former athlete, like time to take care of my body. And the first thing that falls off is usually that last one is time to take care of my body. I'm like, well, if something's got to go, it's going to be my workout. I'm just going to get in and get my work done and then still be able to take care of my family. But that is something that really feeds me, and finding a balance and a rhythm in that, and makes me who I am, has always been a challenge, because I tend to be one that runs towards the most challenging thing that there is. I mean, I led a global anti-trafficking organization. I'm like, give me the biggest, hardest mountain to tackle, and I'm going to do it. And I'm like, there might be bodies on the floor, with it, and I just hope it's not my family or me. But I know that's my nature, and so I've had to kind of learn how to steward that, and more so than just who I am, but also all the pieces of me that includes my family, my kids, my marriage, my physical health, my spiritual health, my emotional health. And I just don't know that I was even equipped for maybe like the spiritual warfare that came along with being in a high level ministry position, and then just the emotional toll. I mean, I feel like in ministry, and I know you can speak to this, Dr. Mike, of you've also done some chaplaincy work with there's so many heavy things that you deal with on a day in and day out basis that most people don't have capacity for, to, number one, even just hear, let alone engage with someone in that deep crisis, or that place of grief, or whatever that is, just those heavy things. And then I know for me, I actually switched ministry positions and went from having a 45-minute commute to having like an 8-minute commute, and I thought, this is amazing, it's going to help my family. What I didn't realize was that 45 minutes for me, that drive home, was the time I needed to decompress.
Yeah.
So like I would pull up in my driveway and I would just sit there for 20 minutes, and then my kids would start peeking out the window and they'd start coming out, and I'm like, I just need a few more minutes before I come inside and have to engage with everyone. But like, there's so much weighty stuff in ministry.
Yeah.
I know for me, that was one of the things I just don't think I was prepared to navigate and be able to process. And you can't offload that to your spouse or to anyone in your circle. You know what I mean? It's just, but you carry the stories, the people, the grief, you also carry the joy with that too. But man, those heavy ones, they
get
tough.
on you.
They do. They stick with you.
I think your nuance of differentiating time is very important, because burnout isn't necessarily you're too busy. Burnout is you're trying to give out of a resource you don't have.
Yeah.
And so you can be busy, and just be busy. But really, burnout is about, I'm trying to give out more than I have to give out.
Yeah.
And we have to have those rhythms, those practices that feed back into our lives, so that we minister out of the overflow, right, of what God's doing in our own heart. That's when real ministry happens.
Right.
So yeah, it's an important distinction.
As a pastor's wife and serving on staff, I recognized, not until really the last few years, that I didn't understand or know what clear boundaries in ministry looked like. And so therefore, because I was kind of being brought up still by an older generation that you really should not have boundaries. And that's really not scriptural or of God. If you're in the ministry, you have no boundaries.
Right.
Everybody should have access to you all the time.
Right.
You need to constantly meet all of their demands. And I think for me, that was just really hard to define, to know what was appropriate boundaries. And I remember when somebody told me, you can work out, and it's an appointment on your calendar.
Pilates.
And you just, and yes, that is Pilates for me. And it's okay to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not available. I have an appointment. And I felt so guilty because that appointment was for me, for my physical fitness,
Right.
which really is mental health as well.
Right.
But it was hard for me to say that I deserve that time.
Right.
Yeah.
And everybody might have a different Achilles heel.
Right.
But Mike, I'd like to ask you, in all of your research and your findings on boundaries and how that impacts ministers.
Yeah, it's a huge deal with ministers, especially, if you have a 2,000 person church, you have staff people, but by and large, the average church in America is less than 100 people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge. And so your pastor, your CEO, sometimes you're the lawn guy, you're the maintenance person,
Right.
you're the counselor, and it goes on and on and on.
Right.
And so, a lot of folks in churches 500 or less are wearing multiple hats, and it's a little harder to do that. I will never forget when I finally reached the point in my life where I said, I'm not changing light bulbs anymore. Like, and some people are like, oh, he's too this or that. But
It's too big now to change.
Yeah,
Right.
somebody said to me just a few weeks ago, well, I can tell you've changed in the last 3 years. And I said, well, thank God. I would hate to think that I spent all this time and money and didn't change.
Right.
You
right.
change.
Yeah, you've changed.
changed.
Yeah, praise be to God for that. Yeah, but establishing boundaries for me was probably top 3 things
Wow.
that I have done. It's one of the big things
Wow.
that it's like you said. I have an appointment with Jesus
Right.
every single day, and unless somebody's dead or actively dying, I'm going to keep that appointment.
Right.
And other things that you just set aside time, and people come around. They'll adjust to it, and it's fine.
At the beginning, you get pushback.
You do get pushed
When
back.
I tell my family I'm going to Pilates, I get pushback.
Yeah.
But
It's only because you schedule it.
This is unbelievable.
think
I
Christy
really don't.
looks at our calendar. She looks at my calendar. So she has access. She looks at my
And
calendar.
prophetically,
And she says, oh, wait, he's getting ready to do this. I want to make sure that, during that time when he needs me the most, I'm going to be at Pilates. Whether it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon or 7:30 in the morning, I'm going to be at Pilates.
or maybe it's a thing my family's adjusting to.
Could be that.
There you go, Christy.
When we were talking about just the impact that it has, that ministry has on family, it's been really interesting over the last couple of years. As we stepped away from our pastorate start, Exo18, and it's been really fascinating talking with my kids a little bit because
On this side.
on this
Yeah.
side of ministry. Because they're both older and everything, but specifically my daughter, she's 28, and we always kind of prided ourselves as being those parents that didn't put all these crazy demands on our kids as pastors' kids, but realizing now that it still happened,
Right.
and that I still did it by as much
Nonverbal.
nonverbal
maybe.
things, and just. It's almost been a light bulb that's gone off in my own head. I can look back at situations and things, and just it was like just being in the pressure cooker all the time, and not realizing that the family was in it also.
Right.
And sometimes because of me, and I had them in the pressure cooker, you know, and it's been really very eye opening. But you go back to you don't know, you know, you just
That's
you
the
don't
truth.
you don't. Otherwise, I would have not done some of the things that I did. But you know, everything becomes so image driven, and I'm wondering if that, Mike, how much does that play a part? You know, we were talking about social media a little bit, but just image. You know, I mean, guys that are just, you know, they're always looking at something else, and the ministry part becomes so image driven. You know, there's almost unrealistic expectations that we talk about that come from other people, but then there are also unrealistic expectations that we put on ourselves. You know, that have to do with the image of what we're trying to do or be, or you know.
Yeah, I think so much of that is, I hate to say it, but just ego driven. Wanting people to believe something that may or may not be true about us, and yeah, that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
Well, you experience burnout because you can't keep up. You know what I mean? You're trying to.
But, you know, Ed, what you were saying about, you know, we recently were at an amazing, very intimate group of pastors that pastor some of the largest churches in the country. And I heard one of them say their children are just starting to leave home, just starting to graduate and leave home. And they said, we always have done it together. We're in it together. We do it together. And that's really what we said too. And, you know,
We thought we did it.
you feel that way, and you're including them and you're wanting to do it together. But then on this end, you know, you hear some feedback. Maybe they didn't want to do it together. And so you're just trying to do the best, and every child is individual. And you're just not sure how it's going to pan out. Like, you know,
we volunteered to do it together. They were conscripted into it.
Oh, right.
You know?
We're doing this together.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. I didn't sign up for this.
So
well, I know we're gonna. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
so many variables. That's all I was going to say.
I know we're gonna come back. We want to really break this out into a couple of different episodes. So, I know we've got everybody feeling just great about where they are right now. You know,
Everybody's so
super
excited.
encouraged, and oh, this sounds great. But it really is. We want to be able to come back in our next episode. We want to really talk about some application.
Yeah,
what are some things that we can do? I mean,
Some
how can we
helpful
find some
things.
healing? How can
Yes.
we find some restoration? How can we find a place of health and stability? So, Dr. Mike, thank you so much for being with us on this
Love it. My
episode,
privilege.
man. It's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. And please be sure and tune in. And Mike, will you just share, tell us about Thriving Pastors as far as how they can connect in?
Yeah. So you can check us out on the web at the TPI. That's THETPI.org. Thriving Pastors Initiative. So all of our cohort information is on there. We do private consulting with people, and so that's probably the best and easiest way to get there. Michael at the TPI is .org is our email.
Awesome. And I'm going to also say that we'll provide a link on our website.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, actually, where it will be
Tell me.
is we're going to write a coordinating resource article to this, and we'll drop it in the bottom of that link to Mike's website and how to get a hold of Mike. And then we'll also have it in Apple Podcast, a link there, and in Spotify Podcast and on YouTube.
Awesome.
Okay.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys, and check us out on our next episode.
All right.